Welcome, friends, to another edition of Wolff Responds. I want to talk briefly with you about war and peace, and specifically about the role of the United States in the two major wars now going on, one in Ukraine and one in Gaza, Israel and Palestine. And I particularly want to focus on the role of the United States, because the United States is the major provider of the funds that keep both wars going. And the United States is at the same time the major provider of the weapons used by the Ukrainians in one war and by the Israelis in the other war. The total cost to the United States in money is astronomical, in excess of $100 billion, perhaps in a large excess over that already enormous sum. It means that the United States, if it pulled back on the provision of weapons and money, would probably close those wars down. It certainly would drastically reduce the physical destruction and the human destruction going on in both those wars in ways that I will explain. I won't go into all the other useful things that could be done with over $100 billion. Useful things in and for Ukraine, useful things in and for Gaza, and useful things in and for the United States. In other words, we could do a lot better with $100 billion than make possible two horrible wars. If this is a plea for peace, yes, of course it is. And let me deal with the lame arguments made against what I am suggesting. One which is repeated over and over again, and most recently by Mr. Biden in France, the notion that there will be a domino effect. In other words, in the case of Ukraine, if the United States doesn't fund and arm the Ukrainians, well, then the Russians will next go after all the rest of Eastern Europe, and the countries there will fall to the Russian army like so many dominoes. There is no evidence, as many experts have pointed out, that the Russians could cope with or want or have any signs of ambition towards the rest of Eastern Europe. The domino theory that you have to go fight a war over there because otherwise your adversary will take over every place has been used to lamely justify every other war the United States has faced since World War II. We were told that the Korean War had to be fought or else the Chinese would take over the rest of Asia. The war was fought to a draw. China went nowhere in the rest of Asia. We were told we had to fight in Vietnam or else communists would overrun all of Indochina. Didn't happen. We were told we had to go into Afghanistan or else ISIS or this one or that one would take over, or we lost the war in Vietnam. Nobody did anything in the way of dominoes. And we lost in Afghanistan and no dominoes fell. So you ought to take the notion that we have to fight in Ukraine or else the dominoes will fall to Russia as another example of being bamboozled into war support on the basis of arguments that have been wrong over and over again. Do we really want all these people to die, all these billions to be wasted on a theory that hasn't worked at all for a very long time? I don't think so. Look, there has to be a just peace, a peace worked out by negotiations and which all the parties participate. Otherwise, these wars will never stop. The struggle between Russians and Ukrainians is many years old. If there isn't a just, negotiated, globally guaranteed peace there, it won't stop just because the official war stopped. It has to be a negotiated solution. And the same is true of Israel and the Palestinians. We have had now decades during which one outrageous military violent activity has shaken these two countries. Each time, the Israelis proudly caused more damage to the Palestinians than vice versa. And each time we were told that's necessary to what? To stop the violence? Clearly, we have not solved the problem. We have the worst violence ever now. The line of violence has gone up, not down. The wars, the repressions have not solved the problem. There needs to be an international, negotiated, just peace, or else the wars will flare up again in Ukraine, in Gaza. That's the lesson of history. It's also the obvious need now, which the United States could take the lead on. Instead, Mr. Biden throws the old domino theory up again, as if it were some hot new insight, which it isn't. Or we have the sad spectacle of Nikki Haley writing on a bomb, "Finish them," as if egging on the Israelis. Who's the them? Hamas? Hamas is bigger now than it was when this activity of Israel started, proving the old adage, if the war is unjust, it produces new soldiers faster than it gets rid of old ones. And what a spectacle. Not a bringer of peace, but a bringer of violence, cheered on by an American politician. No, we can do better than all of this, and we ought to. History will not look kindly on a United States that funded and armed two horrible wars that most of the world have now pronounced unjustified, inappropriate, to be stopped. The war in Ukraine and the one in Gaza. And the United States is in the best position to make that happen. And it is a tragedy that it misses that opportunity and instead perpetuates the violence. This is Richard Wolff, thanking you for your attention to another Wolff Responds.